What I'd like to do tonight is to not presume to understand your specific businesses, but share with you some of the maybe crazier insights about the impacts of turbulence, not just on the Central Coast but globally. This era of what we call rapid, volatile, discontinuous change. In other words, what impacts does turbulence have on the strategic management process? Now, for me to do that, I need to talk a little bit about turbulence, then I need to talk a little bit about the strategic management process, then I need to show you how the two come together. So if you'll bear with me over the next 10 or 15 minutes, that's what I'd like to try and do. I want to talk about briefly the three ages of change through which the planet's been recently, talk a little bit about turbulence in the digital age, what turbulence means for us when it comes to managing our businesses or any kind of organisation. And then we all know the dear old SWOT analysis. I'm not going to bore you rigid with a discussion on the SWOT analysis, but I am going to talk about the way in which the age of turbulence has a huge impact on how we interpret various elements of a SWOT analysis. So that's the journey in a very short space of time. If there is just a few minutes left at the end, I'll just suggest a few ideas that the late Steve Jobs has put forward to help us manage this era of turbulence. So, we live in an age of great turbulence. There have actually been three over the last 500 to 700 years, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, but now the big one. Sometimes we try to forget that. It's kind of nice to sort of put aside the thought that there's a lot of change going on out there. It's just nice to try and make things stop for a while, you know. We try and do that. But the truth of the matter is we're living right in the middle of a forest, and that forest is growing at a phenomenal speed, and that forest is called turbulence. You know, it really upsets me sometimes to read the newspapers, the financial press, particularly when financial results come out, and of course it's profit reporting or loss reporting season at the moment, isn't it? And to see commentaries from CEOs and leaders of business saying the conditions over the last 2 or 3 years have been the worst we have ever experienced. And against that background, our profits have dropped dramatically. ... And what's not said at the end of those 4 dots is, but we hope soon things will return to normal. Well, we got news for them. They're not going to return to normal ever. We live in an age of rapid, volatile, and most importantly, discontinuous change. I think we can all identify with change being rapid. It's happening around us all the time. We can also identify with change being volatile. Some changes are small, some changes are dramatic. But the hard one for us perhaps to accept is this notion of a discontinuity. It was first suggested, well, as far as I'm aware, by management guru Charles Handy. What do we mean by a discontinuity? Well, a discontinuity is a massive change that we cannot predict from what's come before it. It just happens, it happens so swiftly. One of those discontinuities, of course, is the Australian dollar, which means it's hugely cheaper to buy offshore. A second of those discontinuities has been coming at all retail businesses for the last 10 years, 15, maybe more. I'm a refugee from the IT industry, so I saw it coming many years ago. Online retailing. But there's a third. This is the biggest of the lot. And that is, we are coming to the end of the age of consumerism. Now, a gentleman by the name of Paul Gilding wrote a book called The Great Disruption. And in it, he foretells the end of the age of consumerism, the kind of consumerism that means we cannot possibly live with less than 3 TVs and 4 fridges and 2 or 3 big lounges and so forth. But the age is coming to an end. And more businesses in every industry, in every country around the world are going to be hit with more and more of them. And I'm shortly going to suggest a few technologies, way out there technologies, that will rapidly lead to massive discontinuities for all businesses, and the Central Coast is not exempt. It's just that we have to have our eyes wide open to make sure we see them in time and seize the opportunities they provide. The big drivers of discontinuities tend to fit into a lot of different categories, and I'll talk a little more about those categories shortly. Technology is probably the lead driver. Change in the technological world is escalating at a phenomenal rate. Change for the Central Coast will be driven importantly in the short term by the arrival and the rollout of the NBN. But that's only the start. Quantum computers are set to utterly revolutionise the world of computing. But there are other associated developments. One that I like to talk about, that some of my students find a bit scary, is the seeing of the shadow of the Higgs boson. We all think that's just pie in the sky, airy-fairy stuff for some other people. No. Even as recently as yesterday, I was reading an article about developments in photography that now allow mining companies, or very soon will allow mining companies, to actually use photographic equipment to determine the presence of, the size of, the composition of ore bodies. Now the next stage is to use that kind of camera equipment on spacecraft to position them near asteroids, and the technology is being developed to actually mine asteroids. There are already 2 companies that have been set up in the United States to commence asteroid mining. Now some asteroids are full of nickel, some of them are full of rare earths, all the sorts of things that we're going to need for the kind of digital world into which we're going. This is not science fiction, this is science fact. And the pace with which these technologies will develop will merely escalate over the coming years. So the huge driver of change, of rapid, volatile, discontinuous change, is technology. And the implications of that are we can't control these changes. And the other implication is what seemed unthinkable yesterday is commonplace today or will be tomorrow. So what does this turbulence mean for us when we're managing businesses or any kind of organisation? Well, in the days when turbulence was inactive or gentle, that takes me back to the 1960s and 1970s. But today, with discontinuities piling on discontinuities, we're in an age now where that kind of budgeting, that kind of forecasting is simply not possible. We have to come up with another paradigm, way of thinking, way of planning, way of managing that enables us to seize these discontinuities and manage them in a way that enables our businesses to grow and prosper. And that for me involves engaging in a process of what we call dynamic strategic management. So what is it? Well now, it's a very simple model. I won't go through all of it in detail, merely illustrate that the model is made up of analysing what's happening for an organisation. And there are 2 bits of that. We do need to understand these 2 bits. One bit of it is analysing the world outside the organisation. That is exquisitely important. The second bit is working out how the organisation develops its resources to take advantage of what's happening outside the organisation. Now, they're pretty sensible kinds of ideas, but nevertheless, in a minute we'll discover how important this stage of strategic analysis, understanding what's going on in the world outside our business, and secondly, linked to that are the kinds of resources and how we use them to take advantage of the change happening outside the organisation, are 2 absolutely critical pieces of information we must work with all the time. The rest of the strategic planning model or strategic management model involves understanding our objectives, our strategies, our ability to implement those strategies and evaluate the results. In this day and age where I believe dynamic strategic management is important, the focus today is on the front end of that model. It's a very heavy focus on strategic analysis. But what's really interesting is there used to be a time when we'd focus heavily upon preparing really detailed plans to implement a new product range or introduce a new service or to expand the business and to make sure that all the plans were highly detailed, and we'd spend a lot of time on that, and then we'd gradually roll out the plans. If we do that today, particularly in larger businesses, but increasingly as turbulence grows, we're finding it as well in smaller businesses, by the time the plans are rolled out, not only are they obsolete, the whole front end, the industry, the market they're operating in, has moved on. And that is the impact of rapid, volatile, but most importantly, discontinuous change. So the model itself is fine, but the point I'm getting at is that dynamic strategic management involves us in an extremely heavy focus on the front end, particularly what's going on out there. So really the emphasis of this model has shifted back from this end, the detailed planning and implementation end, back to a very heavy focus on what's going on outside an organisation and how we respond. Now, it's as simple as that. But I tell you what, as people, particularly if we've been in business for many years, gee, we find it hard to constantly focus on what's going on outside the doors of our business. What's happening with the commercial sector? What's happening with the retail sector? What's happening with the health sector? What's happening with the defence sector? And the change in all those sectors is so swift and quite discontinuous. It's impossible to pick what's coming up from what's happened before. We don't have this lovely gradual change of events happening over a 5 or 10 year period. Change is happening in a matter of months, so we have to spend a lot of time up here. And that's a key message I want us to really take aboard and absorb. Whether we've got a 2-person or a 2,000-person business, we must spend a lot more time looking at what's happening in our marketplace and in our industry, because the changes are happening so fast. But the question is, where are the changes happening? They're happening outside our organisations. There you are there. We have the industry in which you operate, and then we have this big circle here, which is what we call the general environment, or the macro environment, it's sometimes called. The big picture world. Traditionally, we have focused on what's going on inside our marketplace and looked for changes there, where we've got buyers and suppliers and substitutes and new entrants and so forth, the typical Porter's 5 forces plus government model. But increasingly, as change becomes more volatile, more rapid, and especially more discontinuous, we find the really big changes occurring out here in the general environment, the environment way outside the marketplace for any of your organisations. The big, rapid, volatile, discontinuous changes are increasingly occurring upon outside any individual industry, but rapidly feed into specific industries. So here is the typical model we use to examine what's going on in the big, broad, macro or general environment. You're probably all familiar with it. A pestle model: political, economic, social, technological, environmental and legal. When we come to our specific industries, we're pretty familiar with Porter's 5 forces model: customers, suppliers, threat of substitutes, threat of new entrants, threat of competitors. The point that I want to make is that those big megatrends will start to impact these groups and government as well very, very quickly indeed. So we're going to see a speed up of change within our own industries, every industry, very, very quickly indeed, in a very short space of time. Then when we turn our attention to the other side of strategic analysis, what do we do? How do we respond? We need to look at what happens inside our organisations, and this takes us into the dear old SWOT concept of strengths and weaknesses, competitive strengths and competitive weaknesses. Traditionally, strategists have said, well, when you look inside your organisation, you've got to look at your strategic capabilities. What are your strategic capabilities? Even a dog washer, even a lawn mowing service has strategic capabilities. They have lawn mowers. Most of them have got sufficient training, perhaps in Hort 3 or something like that, to know how to mow lawns properly, know how to do edges properly. They've got all the equipment they need. They've got all the OH&S or WH&S procedures in place, and so forth. Even a lawn mowing service has most of the strategic capabilities needed to do the job, and probably do it pretty well. Those that don't do it well won't survive very long indeed. But traditional strategic management theory says what you've got to do is look at the strategic capabilities of the organisation to make sure they're there. And if they're there, they're strengths. If they're not there, they're weaknesses. It's dead wrong. That comes as a bit of a shock to a lot of businesses and business owners, for them to be told by some bloke like me that all the things they're good at doing and all the things they've done so well don't matter competitively. They're not strengths. They don't give the organisation a real edge over its competitors. And the answer is, yeah, they don't. Why? Well, simply put, all your competitors can mow lawns. All of them have lawn mowing equipment. All of them increasingly will have WH&S facilities or procedures in place. More and more of those that have lawn mowing services have Hort 3 or Hort 4. The truth of the matter is you need a lot more, something more, some more sophisticated combination of the resources and the strategic capabilities you've got if you are going to be successful in seizing the opportunities that are rapidly coming into our markets because of the big megatrends occurring in the general environment, or if you're going to at least push back the threats. The truth of the matter is that you need something more than strategic capabilities to succeed in the new way of doing things. And that new concept we call having core competences. Core competency theory tells us that it's the way you combine your strategic capabilities, your skill in doing that in a unique way that'll give you that edge over your competitors. Now, there are lots and lots of criteria that make up a core competence of an organisation, but most importantly, core competences are made up of very complex sets of strategic capabilities. Now, I'm not saying our lawnmower man or our dog washing person need to have quite such sophisticated core competences, but they do need to build whatever it is they do, let's call them strategic capabilities, into some really seriously deep competitive edge that gives them the advantage over all other dog washers and lawn mowing groups. And they must keep working at that competitive edge. In times past, in generations past, it wasn't so important. But as more and more change occurs, more and more competitors appear, more and more competitors with an edge will appear. Then in order for us to be most competitive in the marketplace, then we are the ones that have to be smarter than our competitors. And that means combining our strategic capabilities into these rich, tight core competences that our competitors cannot match or beat. Just a couple of lessons from Steve Jobs that might stimulate us as we travel through life, enjoying more and more focus on strategic analysis. This is from a couple of articles published by Motley Fool, 7 leadership lessons from Steve Jobs, and 7 more leadership lessons from Steve Jobs. One of them is focus on what you do best. Don't try to be all things to all people. He's basically saying focus on your core competences. How beautiful. How true. When behind, leapfrog. Don't catch up, you'll be dead. Leapfrog. Another one is I love this, be intuitive about what our customers want. Don't keep asking them. He said get inside the mind of the customer and intuit what they don't know they want and build that. That's clever. That's leapfrogging. Okay? Another one is people do judge a book by its cover. Let's get real. He's absolutely right. Don't let technology destroy face-to-face communication. For me, that's the big one. Sweat both the big picture and the details. As strategists, we must do that all the time. Look at the world outside our organisation, see the big mega trends, see the impacts on our organisations, see them long before our competitors, and then sweat the details to build up our core competences, shape them, reshape them, create new ones that will seize those opportunities and crush our competitors. This is beautiful Schumpeterian gales of creative destruction, as Anton knows so well. And remember, it's people who must use technology. A little subtle thing for us to remember. Thanks for your time.